some people journal, some people don't like to, but even like typing it in your phone and being like, this was the highlights. This was the part where like I'm gonna feel sad about this. I really am gonna miss this part. And like having that to look back on, it really just allows you more to process through it and let it go instead of just keeping it close to you because you think that's what should be done.
I'm Lisa Harding, ex-EdTech CEO turned certified teacher career coach. It wasn't all that long ago that I was recruiting, interviewing, and hiring teachers for roles in corporate America. Teachers that ended up being some of my all-time best employees. Fast forward through my own career transition, where I left my role as CEO to become a stay-at-home mom, I now work with and empower teachers to transform their lives by turning their once distant career dreams into realities. In this podcast, I give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. If you're a burnt-out teacher or simply need a change and you're looking to create a life you love, you're in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Beyond the Classroom. Today, we're diving into a deeply personal and often overlooked topic, the grief that comes with leaving a career you once loved, or realizing it's just no longer the same. I'm joined today by Nicole Haugen, a registered nurse, life coach, and expert in navigating grief and transitions. Nicole brings a unique perspective to this conversation, blending her professional expertise with compassionate insights to help us understand why it's important to honor feelings of loss and how to move forward with hope and purpose. If you've ever felt conflicted, stuck, or even heartbroken about leaving teaching, this episode will provide both understanding and encouragement. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to jump into this episode, and I know it's going to get pretty deep and probably pretty personal, but I like to start all of my episodes with guests with kind of a fun random question. So I keep them easy, so I know you didn't prep for this, but what's one small thing in life that always makes you smile?
Probably a peppermint coffee.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. So you're a coffee girl then. I just got done with my coffee today.
Yep, yep. And I drink peppermint in my coffee year round. So
Okay, so year round. All right. I like that because I know that sometimes we like things seasonally, but I know that's one that you can find in the stores at least.
yep,
For the creamer, you can get that year.
yep.
I love that. That's a great kind of pick me up. Um, why don't you share, besides loving coffee, why don't you share a little bit about your background with us, and how you got into the world of helping people navigate grief?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for, I don't know, 15 years now, I think. Um, Mostly I worked in hospice. That's my passion is the hospice side of it. I have not worked as a nurse for the last few years. I've been doing coaching, but that if I ever went back, it for sure would be hospice. So I was working as a hospice nurse, got married, started having baby. We have six girls.
Oh,
And so it life was busy and basically I would come home, husband would then go, so I worked the day shift, husband would go in the evenings. And so it was basically just like passing each other in the night and which, we thought was fine. I thought was like, okay, that's the stage of life we're in. I wasn't overly happy, but it was fine. And then in 2019, so my dad had been diagnosed with cancer in 2009 when I was pregnant with my first child. And he lived with, so when he got diagnosed, it was prostate cancer, but it had migrated, it had already been metastasized to his bones by the time they found it. And so he lived with his bones cancer for 10 years. And in 2019, in April, we knew the treatments weren't working anymore. There was one morning he woke up and he could not walk. He couldn't move his lower part of his body. So I went home, helped them get him lined up for hospice. And then he passed away at the end of July. So just a few months later. And I was heavily pregnant at that time with our sixth child. And she was born 6 weeks before my dad died. And then for about 4.5 months after my dad died, my mom died very suddenly. It was a winter storm. And actually, it was exactly 5 years ago today when we're recording this that my brother called and said, mom is missing. Have you heard from her? Have you seen her? Went up to her place. The garage door's open. We can't find her. So we called the authorities. And what we found out, realized was that she had gone home that night and the wind was blowing across her driveway. And so her driveway is like a mile long driveway. It's just like this dirt road surrounded by water at the bottom of it or at the end of it. And so she went to turn and she missed the driveway because again, the snow was blowing and she couldn't see and thought she was turning into the driveway, but she went onto the water. The ice was not thick enough at that time yet, so her car fell through. So when the authorities came out, it took them a few days to find the car, because we didn't know, right? We didn't know she could have been anywhere. But then that night, like the wind had died down, we could see the tire tracks. And so they were able to, okay, this is most likely where to start. So they started searching there. It took a few days, they found the car, got the car out. Because again, it was like -50 at this point. And then after they got the car out, they realized her body's not in it. She did try to escape and get out. And so then it took a day or so later till they found her body and were able to retrieve that. And so that was just, I mean, it was a few weeks before Christmas. Like it was just horrible, just cope, survive mode. Again, I had 6 children. I had ages 9 down to an infant. And so just trying to get through Christmas and the holidays. And then a month after my mom died, I found out that there was financial infidelity in my marriage. And this was not something that my husband willingly told me. I found out because a letter came in the mail and I had to sign for it. And I opened it up and realized there was thousands of dollars in credit cards that I had no idea about, was not aware of. And so he admitted to, yes, I've been buying things and spending money on things. And over the next few years, then slowly it was revealed that there was multiple credit cards and multiple ways that he was doing this. And yeah, so that was how through all that, then grieving, right? Grieving my parents, grieving the marriage I thought I had. And then I found life coaching about a year or so after that. And initially joined because I wanted to lose weight, and I did. But I realized when you're not coping with food, that other feelings and emotions come up that you're not counting on or thinking about. And so that's kind of my journey on how I was like, yeah, I want to help people through grief.
Wow. So yeah, you have the medical background, the expertise working through that. I mean, your own story is just, something that is almost unimaginable that you went through yourself and you brought yourself out of it. You have your own story of how you've done that, and now being able to help other people navigate grief, you've turned it into like a blessing for other people.
Yeah.
And Nicole, I know you have a podcast where you talk about grief, and I know you work a lot with, is it nurses that kind of go through the grieving process with their patients as well, or what are your average like clients that you work with for coaching? Is it grief from
Yeah.
all spectrums, or
Yeah, it's really all over the place grief. I would say about 50-50 with like nurses grieving like when a patient dies, or even the expectations you have when you first become a nurse versus what it kind of turns into or what it really is. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of red tape kind of stuff. And then I also help mostly a lot overall. The main theme of people that I help are the ones that, like teachers, like nurses, who give to everybody. And then when something happens to them, or even when, it doesn't have to be major, it doesn't have to be your parents dying, or it's something happens and you just all of a sudden realize like, oh my gosh, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know how to cope with this. I don't know how to deal with this because I've been giving, 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 and I don't know what to do.
and I think that really is what resonates with our audience, and kind of how you said how nurses start and it's not what they thought it was. I think for the majority of our audience here on this podcast and teachers that I coach through the career transition, there's like a loss of a sense of self. We're so tied to the career. We feel like we're letting people down. And then also, I mean, the profession has really, truly changed. I mean, I know COVID was a big time where the teaching profession took a pivot, but there have been changes that have been happening in education long before that, and they just kind of keep snowballing. So thank you for sharing that deeply personal story and your personal experience with grief. I'd like to dive into some strategies and things that teachers can start thinking about to help them, whether it's they're grieving maybe that loss of self of who they thought they were, they're just grieving leaving the profession, maybe even just acknowledging that this can cause grief. Because, like you said, grief can come from a lot of different things. There are major life events that we obviously associate with grief, but I think sometimes we don't necessarily associate that term with leaving a job. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Um, let's talk, maybe we could jump in. My first question would be like, why do you think it's important to acknowledge that there is grief when leaving a career, especially one as emotionally connected as teaching? And how is grief associated with like leaving a career?
Yeah, so really, grief is like a normal response to a major loss. And so when you're leaving something, it's not necessarily because you didn't set out that way. You didn't set out like starting your teaching profession being like, yes, I'm going to do this for 5 years and then I'm going to jump to this. And then that's not going to work out great. So then I'm going to have to jump to this. So we start out thinking that things are going to be this way forever. And so then when they're not, there's that unmet expectation. And so when any time really that we have an unmet expectation, there is grief. And, it doesn't have to be that noticeable to anybody else, but we feel it internally. There is like this shift inside of us and it can be hard. And especially when you don't put a label on it and be like, oh, I'm grieving this. Then if it feels like you're just kind of floundering out there, like searching for a lifeline, and you're like, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah, because you know you're not, the feelings aren't normal. You know you're feeling something. There definitely is something about putting a label on it. Or for any of my listeners that have gone through the exercise of like just acknowledging the practical considerations of changing jobs, I always kind of use the analogy where like you have all these things floating in your mind, like you have to worry about this and that, but just basically putting them on paper, making them concrete is a good way to move forward. And I feel like that analogy applies with grief, how you said it's like sometimes we just need to acknowledge and then label that this is grief and that's okay, and then begin to work through that. How do people even begin processing? Like, what are the first steps of processing grief? I mean, first you, I guess, acknowledge it, but then what?
Yeah, so first I always tell people like acknowledge it and then name it more specifically. So if you're like, I'm having grief and I'm feeling angry that this didn't play out the way I thought. Or sometimes you feel maybe betrayed by the system or the coworkers that you had, or so you might feel angry, you might feel sadness. So like there's all those like layers of grief in there, but really like name the specific one that you're feeling in that moment and then to just allow it. And by allow it, I mean really describe it in your body. Like, where do you feel it at? Like, for me, it's a lot of times in my shoulders. I like feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world in my shoulders. I get stress and tension in my neck. Um, if you're feeling anxious, often more times it's like stomach area that you can feel it. And so just like pausing and like describing it and in great detail, give it a color. Is it hot? Is it cold? And then breathing through that allows it to fade away. And that's the thing that I really think that most people, because we're human, we don't want to feel uncomfortable. It feels horrible. We try to get busier or do more things or just push it away and be like, oh, well, I just need to like get through this and just power through it. Or we distract ourselves, right? Our phone is a great distraction nowadays. And so we just pull that up and we start scrolling. And so we do things like that instead of taking the 60 to 90 seconds to allow the feeling and move on with it.
Yeah, and it's I kind of relate with that. It's like you don't want to put yourself in that uncomfortable situation, so you try to do everything else. But if I'm hearing this correctly, your advice is like let's actually get into that moment and let's feel it like very deeply before we can move on from that. Um, what are some of the common emotions that you think people feel when they're going through this, or experiences that a teacher might go through or feel when they're going through this process. And I think maybe talking about those might help people realize that they actually are in this grieving stage.
hmm Yeah, I think a big one is probably like some kind of like betrayal, resentment, anger. A lot of times too, whenever I have switched jobs there's that excitement, but then there's also that pressure, the anxiety, the overwhelm of what if this fails? And that a lot of times tends to outweigh the excited feeling. And just, we do anything based off of our emotions. And so for me personally, it was when I decided like, okay, I'm gonna pause my nursing career, maybe forever, I don't know, but it felt very heavy. It felt very, this is permanent, and so I better not mess up. I better not fail. I better make the right decision. Like a lot of we put all of that on ourselves, and so then I procrastinated for a long time of doing anything, and I just like felt miserable because I knew something needed to change. I knew that things were not going well the way they were, but I felt stuck still. And so that is probably another emotion, is just feeling stuck
Yeah.
in that situation.
I definitely hear that a lot. And I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with the nursing field, but I know for teachers, that's a common thing that my teachers will talk about is like, I'm afraid of leaving. What if it doesn't work? That the failure, but then also like thinking that they can't ever go back to that. And that's really, I mean, especially in teaching because there's a national teacher shortage. Like teachers, if you miss it, you can go back. And I'm sure it's the same with like you can always go back. It might not be the same school, may not, you're not going to get the same classroom. Like things may be different, but if you move on and you do fail, which you probably won't anyway, but if it's not what you want, you can always go back to that other thing. But the process of feeling stuck and not making progress is definitely a huge aspect of it. And I think with teachers, and I feel like nurses really relate to this because they have patients, and that's a very similar, different, but similar relationship versus other careers that don't have a third party that they emotionally care about. But for teachers, there's that emotional connection to their students. And a big thing I think people grieve or that they feel guilt about is their students. Like, I can't leave my students or my students need me. And I'm guessing that nurses have that similar feeling with patients. Do you have anything, to speak directly to that relationship with the students? Today's episode is sponsored by the Teacher Career Transition Academy. Are you eager to explore new possibilities but find yourself unsure of where to start? Look no further than our Teacher Career Directory. Available for free, this comprehensive resource features over 200 careers tailored for transitioning teachers. Dive into detailed insights including average U.S. salary ranges, occupational outlooks, and even a personalized skills and interests inventory. Download now at teachercareertransitionacademy.com/directory. I'll also drop the link in the show notes of this episode. So don't miss out and claim your free directory today at teachercareertransitionacademy.com/directory.
Yeah, and it's 100% the same thing, because you think, if I'm not there for them, who is? Like they need me. Like I'm letting them down. And I think too, like we see the shortage like of teachers. I mean, like a huge shortage of teachers. And we feel bad and guilty that we're adding to that. Like if you're switching to something else or shifting, like we feel so bad for that. And it's the same with nurses. Like there's always a shortage of nurses. And so with that, like I like to tell people to like really like narrow it down and think of, which child are you really worried about, or what situation are you really really concerned about, because we tend to think of things in such a broad generalized sense that it feels like the weight of the world, because well, there's a shortage of teachers and so I can't quit, I'm going to let them down. And it's like, the reality is I'm worried about a handful of students. And I know also that like the next teacher, that like I only have them for 1 year, maybe a little longer, there are other people that will step in. And so, just I like to get specific with it, and really say, okay, like what specifically am I worried about? What and the funny part is once we narrow it down, is oftentimes we're probably not even showing up as much as we think we are. Like we think that we're the only ones doing this, but when you start listing out the facts, you're like, oh no, actually, like I could recommend this program for them, or I could help them with this, or I could set them up with this. And there are other people that care as well.
Yeah, I think adding that specificity to it makes it more concrete to be able to work through it. And then how you said, once you start peeling back the layers of the onion, you're like, oh yeah, you might be like, they don't really need me. Like
Yeah.
I felt that way in my career transition as well. And for those listeners that may not know my story, I was the CEO of a ed tech company. I stepped down. My transition was to be a stay-at-home mom, and I felt all that like I'm letting them down. Like I've been here for 15, like all of those feelings. And then, you step away and you're like, oh yeah, they didn't really even need me.
Yeah.
Um, and they don't, but you are a beacon. You are a beacon for your students, and
Yeah.
you have built this, and what you do is amazing and it's incredible. But that weight of the world is not intended for you. And I mean, I definitely felt that as well. Do you have any strategies or ideas or thoughts of how teachers could honor the positive memories and impact that they've had, but while still moving on into the next chapter?
Yeah, I like just little things, like even just like writing down like some of your favorite moments of teaching, or maybe you want, like there's so many resources now like Shutterfly, or even you can order like on Walmart. Like you could order a blanket that has like different sayings or different things that the students have, like cards over the years, if you've collected those, like just little momentum things that don't take very much time to patch together online, to order it, and to have that. And so it can bring you some comfort in that time of feeling, yeah, really feeling guilt and stress and overwhelm and and sadness, and maybe stuck. Like it can help you in that way. And then again, like that way it's more of a tangible thing instead of all these things just floating out in your brain.
I feel like that's a kind of a recurring theme here is like, let's make it tangible, let's write it down, let's label it. Um, what about compassion? I'd love to talk about how like self-compassion can play a role navigating grief, and maybe how teachers could practice self-compassion.
Yeah, and for me, for sure, once I started to process grief and like I realized they said like you really are caregivers, like as teachers, you're caregivers. And so you are so busy making sure that everybody else has everything first, that once I stepped back and I was like, and not in a selfish way, right? Like a little bit selfish, because it's like, no, I need to also like, it's like when the airplane is going down, they tell you to put on your oxygen mask first for a reason. And I feel like in life, though, we don't live that way. We give it to everybody else. And then we're like, well, I can't breathe. And then you're floundering for finding things. And so I like to just start very simply and basically with making a list of 20 things that are small that you love. Like, because we always think like self-care has to be like, oh my gosh, I have to go book a full body massage, or I have to plan a trip, or like that is too much. Like it's too much. A lot of times when you're like in between jobs, or like if you have children and all the things. So I like to just like, again, for me, I like peppermint creamer in my coffee. I like setting up my coffee machine the night before. So in the morning, I just have to push a button. I like fuzzy slippers and fuzzy socks. So like when I come home, I have something warm to put my feet in. My feet are always freezing. I like fuzzy blankets. Like some people like baths. I'm not a bath person, but some people like baths. I love to read. So like, oh, I'm gonna go online and I'm gonna look for recommendations. I'm gonna post in a teachers group of recommendations of great books to read. Like just very, very simple, basic things, um, to start to show yourself love throughout the day, just little small things. And some of them you're probably already doing, but it feels like a chore and a task instead of I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah, and I feel just being a mom that resonates with me. I mean, I'm a mom of two. You're a mom of six, so I can't even imagine how busy your life is. But I think that's an interesting point that you bring up that these things that you do for self-care, like as small as they are, they just become like another chore versus recognizing like I have the privilege of like sitting down with my coffee, having a flavor that I like, and like let me turn off my phone, let me get in this moment, and let me take this moment and just acknowledge that I'm caring for myself, that I love myself, and that, I'm gonna have this moment for me. I love that. What about other rituals or practices that could help a teacher let go of their old career while embracing what's next? Is there anything to do to like help us just let it go?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, like, because it is a grief in a way, it really comes back to like naming that feeling, allowing that feeling. And maybe not if you can't in the moment, right? Like sometimes you're busy and you can't be like, oh, I need to pause for 60 to 90 seconds and I need to allow this feeling. Like, but realistically, like you can go back and even like reflecting on the day and like journaling. Some people journal, some people don't like to, but even like typing it in your phone and being like, this was the highlights. This was the part where like I'm gonna feel sad about this. I really am gonna miss this part. And like having that to look back on if you want to. You don't have to look back on it ever, but it really just allows you more to process through it and let it go instead of just keeping it close to you because you think that's what should be done.
That makes sense. And then I guess this kind of makes me think about like like you said, like letting it go or putting it out there into the world, like talking through things. So I guess that kind of leads me into asking you, like when someone works with a grief coach or a life coach, what does that look like? Like, when someone works with you, for example, like is it talk therapy? Do you do exercises? Maybe kind of talk to us about what it's like working with someone like through this one-on-one.
Yeah, so I kind of do a combo. I mean, most of it is talking. So it is a one-on-one call. And so I like to set goals with people of, these are like the top five things I'm really struggling with. And out of that, if the top one or two things like got 60% better, all the rest would kind of follow. And so we focus on like for you specifically what it is like because everybody's different. Everybody processes grief differently. Everybody processes things differently. And like grief is the same, but it's so unique for each person. And so we really focus on for you what that looks like, what things you want to do, what's tangible for you. Because like for you, you have two kids, I have six kids. Like just like the varieties of where you're at in life are different. And so then we work through that. And people are different. Also, some people are like, I don't ever want homework. I have enough on my plate. I don't ever want to do anything. And some people like to have reflection questions to reflect back on during the week until we meet again. And so it again, it's very personalized onto what each person needs. But I do like to always give them a little a thought to think on or reflect on or something to practice more that week instead of okay, you've been telling yourself I'm letting everybody down. Like what if you just practice this instead this week?
Okay, yeah, that's awesome, and it makes sense that everyone's journey would be so different. Do you find that most people like to do Zooms, like face, like so they can see you, or like I feel like maybe grief. I don't know, like do people? Is it more on the phone? Do you do Zoom calls? How does that work?
Yeah, so for the most part, I've been doing Zoom. I also have what's it called? Oh, Voxer, where it's like a walkie-talkie app.
Oh, that's interesting.
I also have that as an option if people are like, no, I just can't. Or, like I think again, people's journeys are so different. There's a lot of women that I work with that are just like, I have 10 minutes on my drive in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening, and that's about it. And so then, you Voxer back and forth and like they say something and then I'll hop on, maybe a little bit later and like kind of talk through them and be like, well, you mentioned this. Did you even know that that's what you're telling yourself? And so we can work through that way as well.
That's awesome, and it's interesting. I love how technology has changed truly like everything. Before you have to schedule an appointment to go to your coach or your therapist or whoever, and go to the office and wait, blah blah blah. And like now everything is online. You can meet with people face to face. So I love how that's moving into like all aspects of our lives. And Vox are just making it easy. I do sometimes similar with members of the academy, just over Facebook Messenger now. You can just like shoot
Yeah.
a little reply because I'm doing
Yeah.
a million things too. It's just nice to know that there's someone there when you're feeling that.
Mhm.
Um, I guess my last question, we could wrap things up, or just any final words of encouragement or wisdom that you have for teachers that are navigating the grief of leaving the classroom.
Yeah, I always tell people like you're not crazy. This is grief. And so it is a lot of roller coasters of emotion and just to talk to somebody, find a friend or a spouse or a coach or whoever, just to talk through that because it does give you an outside perspective. Our brains are very concrete, black and white, and it thinks because this is how we think that that's how the world is and that's how everybody else thinks. And so when you start to like poke holes in that, you realize like, oh, maybe I don't have to think of it this way. Yeah, that really is not serving me. That really feels awful to tell myself that all the time. And I think especially as women, like we spend so much time telling ourselves how we're failing and find somebody who tells you that you're not.
Why do we do that? But yeah, yeah. Whether it's a friend or a coach, I feel like we keep going back to this same theme, Nicole, of like get it out, get it on
Mhm.
paper, label it, don't run away from it, live in it, acknowledge it. Um, and I think that's great. And you definitely have been through more than the average person. I appreciate you sharing such a personal story with our audience today, going over all these different strategies, very practical tips. I love a great practical tip, exercises that they can do, things to help teachers work through this. And I guess my hope is that maybe this helps someone just acknowledge that what they're feeling is grief, and then they can begin to practice that. So thank you, Nicole. And friends out there listening in today, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I hope this conversation with Nicole helped you reflect on the emotional side of leaving teaching and maybe reminded you that you are not alone in this journey and that these feelings are completely valid. If you are looking for more practical guidance to help with your career transitions, be sure to check out some of our other episodes, which are filled with practical tips and strategies for making a move in your career. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your feedback. Please leave a quick review. Let me know what you found helpful. It also helps other teachers discover the podcast. We'll be making links to Nicole's website, her podcast as well, so you can follow up. You can listen in on her podcast as well. And there's lots of great resources that we will share with you in the show notes. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any upcoming episodes here at Beyond the Classroom. And remember, friends, the journey is just the beginning. Embrace the adventure.